Did Moneta of Cremona use Galatians 4:10 and Colossians 2:16 as an argument against the observance of the Sabbath by Waldenses? Those Christians who criticize Seventh-Day Adventists especially attack the claim of Adventists that the Waldenses kept the Seventh-Day Sabbath. The Advent Defense League, in response to such attack from Myles Ketelsen of Answering Adventism, made a video where it presented historical evidences to support that claim. The Advent Defense League invited James Bowen to do it. The name of the video is Did Myles Really Say This About the Waldenses? While as an Adventist I appreciate this effort, I cannot accept and use incorrect information. That's why I have checked up on what the Advent Defense League presented as an evidence, and I have found that one of the evidences is not correct. Let's listen what James Bowen said about the testimony of Moneta of Cremona.
But let's take a look in the 12th century what the hot topic was. Moneta of Cremona was one of the inquisitors in the 12th century who opposed the Waldenses specifically for Sabbath keeping. And his argument was de Sabbato and de dia Dominico. He makes a distinction there between the Sunday and the Sabbath. And he specifically uses Colossians 2:16. You can see it right down here for yourself. This is the Venerabilis Patris. And Dr. Gard-Domstieg commented on this as well. You can see where he tries to use Galatians 4 verse 10 to argue against them as well. Now, Edwin, we did a video on this earlier, and we commented how Galatians was referring to the Galatians who were not Jews originally, and returning back to their previous practices had nothing with going back to the Seventh-Day Sabbath. It had everything to do with going back to pagan celebration of days that, so it's interesting that this inquisitor is trying to use Galatians 4:10, but it was not something that had anything to do with the Seventh-Day Sabbath. And he was also trying to use Colossians 2:16 as well. But he says here, against these heretics, namely the Cathari and the Waldenses, it is that what we find is written in Galatians 4:10, etc. He doesn't understand the distinction between ceremonial Sabbaths and moral Sabbaths. Okay, and that was one of the arguments. Now,
the listener can draw a conclusion from this Bowen's statement that Moneta himself objected against Waldenses and used as an argument Galatians 4:10 and Colossians 2:16. Is it so? Let's read the book of Moneta itself. Here on the screen is its title page. The title in Latin is Venerabilis Patris Monetae Cremonensis Ordinis Praedicatorum Sancti Patris Dominico, aequales adversus Cataros et Waldenses Libri Quinque. In English, the 5 books of the Venerable Father Moneta of Cremona, of the Order of Preachers, equal to the Saint Father Dominic, against the Cathars and the Waldenses. On the page 475, we find chapter 10 of the 5th book. Di illo mandato, memento uddim sabbati sanctifices. About that commandment, remember to sanctify the Sabbath day. The first and only section is titled De Sabbato et Dies Dominico, about Sabbath and the Lord's Day. In this chapter, Moneta discusses that Jews observe Sabbath. The Jews kept this commandment to the letter, paragraph 1. In the second paragraph, page 476, he says, before we proceed further, we must answer a certain objection of the Jews who say that we are transgressors of their commandment, because it is said in Exodus 31 verse 16 and 17, which is eternal and everlasting. Then he gives his apology for Sunday observance. I will not read it, you may pause the video and read it yourself. After giving his apology for Sunday observance, at the end of the 5th paragraph he says, we also observe other festivals from the constitution of the Church, that is, veneration of the saints, and in their memory, that is, that we may be mindful of their works in order to do them. Behold, what a reasonable cause for the institution of the Church, but that she can establish, is clear above chapter 6 of this part. And after this follows that paragraph which is quoted by Bowen. Against this, the heretic, namely the Cathar and the Waldensen, objects to what is said in Galatians 4 verse 10. Who does object? Moneta, as Bowen himself claims? No, Moneta says that it is the heretic who objects, not Moneta. Against what does the heretic object? Against the observance of the festivals by the Roman Catholic Church. So, it is Waldenses and Cathars who use Galatians 4, 10, 11 and Colossians 2, 16 against Catholic Church. According to Moneta, they claimed that it is a sin to observe the days. Let's read the 6th and the 7th paragraphs. Against this, the heretic, namely the Cathar and the Waldensian, objects to what is said in Galatians 4 verse 10. You observe days and months and seasons and years, and adds, verse 11, I fear lest perhaps I have labored among you in vain, that is, without fruit. Therefore, it is a sin to observe the days. Also to the Colossians 2 verse 16, therefore, let no one judge you in food or in drink or in respect of the day of the feast or of the new moon or of the Sabbath. And then Moneta gives his answer to these objections from the heretic, paragraph 8, the last. Solution. The apostle was accusing those who were Judaizers, that is, they observed the custom of the Jews, which were precepts of the law of the Lord, for which reason they also observed circumcision. Whence, accusing them, he says in chapter 5 verse 1, For if you are circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. Also verse 2, And I testify again to every man who circumcises himself, that he is a debtor to the fulfillment of the whole law. Then he said to them, rebuking them, The days you observe, that is, the Sabbath, and the Neomenia, that is, the new moon, the beginning, that is, of the lunation, and the 14th day from the evening to the 21st of the same month, when they ate unleavened bread. They also observed the months, namely the 7th month, because in it they observed the first day. Also from the 15th to the 22nd day, according to Numbers 29, verses 1-12 and following. And this festival is called Skinopiga. They also observed the seasons coming to Jerusalem 3 times a year, believing that they were fulfilling that commandment of Exodus 25:5-17. 3 times a year all your male will appear before the Lord your God. They also observed the years, namely the 7th year and the 50th, which is called the Jubilee, of which we have Leviticus 25 verses 4 and 10. The same is said of Colossians 2. Therefore, let no one judge you in food or in drink or in respect of the day of the feast, that is, the Jewish. Whence also explaining the feast day by part, he says, or of the new moon or of the Sabbath. There are therefore no Jewish holidays to be observed, but days appointed by the Church, as has been said. Moneta never mentions in this chapter whether Waldenses kept the Sabbath, so Bowen's statement that Moneta used Galatians 4:10-11 and Colossians 2:16 against Waldenses is not true. It is interesting enough that Bowen first puts on the screen the quote from Moneta in correct translation. Against these the heretic objects, namely the Catharai and Waldenses, but later he puts the wrong translation. Against these heretics, namely the Catharai and Waldenses, it is that we find what is written in Galatians 4:10. The verb objects is gone. The phrase against these heretics is in correct translation of the original Latin phrase contra istut objicit haereticus. Istut is the accusative neuter singular of iste, that. It should be translated as that or this, but not these. Istut in contra istut objicit haereticus refers to that which was previously written by Moneta in the preceding paragraph, not to the heretics. Objicit is third person singular present active indicative of the verb objicio. It should be translated as objects. This verb describes what the heretic does. Haereticus is nominative masculine singular. Heretic objects against what is said by Moneta about the observance of the Lord's Day and other festivities in the preceding paragraph. Obviously, Bowen gave the wrong translation, and I wonder whether he done it because he misunderstood the Latin text of the chapter 10 of the 5th book of the Moneta's treatise. I think that Bowen should read again that chapter and see his mistake, and he himself should apologize publicly on the channel of the Advent Defense League. Intellectual honesty requires it. I advise Bowen to do it. Acknowledging this mistake will not harm his reputation in the eyes of the soundly thinking viewers. I appreciate their efforts in defending Adventist faith, but it must be done correctly down to the smallest details.